Good afternoon, boys and girls. It's good to have you in grammar class today. This is the fifth week. It's sad that some of us who should be learning in physical classrooms are unable to do so. But nevertheless, let's enjoy this lesson and enjoy learning as usual. Today we are going to be looking at the topic comparison of adjectives. Comparison of adjectives. By the end of this class, you should be able to use the positive, comparative, and superlative degrees of regular and irregular adjectives to make comparisons. I'd like us to just have a quick review of what we did last week. Last week we talked about adjectives, and we said words that tell us more about nouns and pronouns are called adjectives. We made a differentiation between adjectives and adverbs. Okay, so words that tell us more about nouns and pronouns are called adjectives. Examples are small, short, and sharp. We also talked about the various kinds of adjectives that we have. We talked about descriptive adjectives, adjectives that show quality, adjectives that tell of quantity, adjectives that demonstrate or show nouns, and adjectives of numbers. We also talked about interrogative adjectives that are used to ask questions. Okay, today we are going to our topic, comparison of adjectives. Usually we compare things, okay? We compare people, we compare things, we compare places, we compare concepts, okay? So we compare things generally. But there's a way to compare things using adjectives. And so we use comparison of adjectives when we want to compare more than one thing. There are 3 degrees of comparison of adjectives, and the 3 degrees are the positive, the comparative, and the superlative. Now, remember that degrees mean levels, okay? It means levels. That means we increase. There is an increase. It's getting bigger or it's getting smaller. Okay, so there is a progression. Now, the 3 degrees of comparison, like I just mentioned, are the positive, the comparative, and the superlative. The positive is usually the base form of the adjective, and it's the first degree of comparison. It just mentions the adjective. It's just the word that is the adjective. The comparative form is the second degree of comparison of adjectives, and it compares 2 things. Don't forget that it compares 2 things. The third degree is the superlative form, the superlative degree, and it compares more than 2 things. So it could compare 3 things, it could compare 4. Okay, it compares more than 2 things, more than 2 nouns. Let's look at this example. Tolu is tall, Ayo is taller, but Bolu is the tallest of them all. Tolu is tall, Ayo is taller, but Bolu is the tallest of them all. Now, if you look at this sentence, okay, you discover that tall is the adjective. And tall is just the word that talks about the adjective. So it's the positive form. It is the first degree. When we want to compare more than one thing, we are comparing 2 things now. We have Tolu and Ayo, and we are comparing their height. We would use taller. Okay? And taller is the adjective, and taller is the comparative form. Okay? The comparative degree. When we are comparing more than 2 things, we have the superlative degree. So tallest is the superlative. Okay? Tolu is tall. The positive is tall. The comparative is Ayo is taller. Taller is the comparative. But Bolu is the tallest of them all. Tallest is the superlative. Okay? Example 2. The fish in the aquarium is big. The fish in the pond is bigger, but the fish in the big ocean is the biggest. The fish in the aquarium is big. The fish in the pond is bigger, but the fish in the big ocean is the biggest. Here we have big as a positive. We have bigger. Can you tell me, okay, if you said comparative, you're correct. And biggest is superlative because you are comparing more than two things at this point. Now we use ER or EST to form the comparative or superlative forms of the adjective. Okay, we use ER for the comparative and we use EST for the superlative. Now let's look at this positive, comparative and superlative degrees of comparison of adjectives. The first one here we have is busy. So anytime you have Y, okay, you change Y to I and you add ER. So we have busy, busier, busiest. We have clever, cleverer, cleverest. We have dark, darker, darkest. We have young, younger, youngest. We have hard, harder, and hardest. Remember, anytime you have Y, you replace the Y with I, and then you add ER for the comparative, and you add EST for the superlative form. Otherwise, for other words, you add ER or R, okay, like in clever, okay, you add ER, and for cleverer, and you have EST for the superlative cleverest, just like the other words that we have here. Okay, so pause the video and go through this table and try to understand. Remember, we said you add ER each time you are making a comparative form of adjectives, and we have EST when we are making the superlative form or degree of the adjective. But this is not what happens in all the cases. This is usually what happens when you have adjectives that are regular or don't change their form when they are changing degree. Now, sometimes we add more or most when we are making the comparative and superlative forms of some adjectives. And this happens especially when the adjectives have more than one syllable, okay? Have more than one syllable. Example, when we have adjectives beautiful, colorful, difficult, expensive, famous, and interesting, okay? The last word there is interesting. To make the comparative form of this adjective beautiful or colorful, difficult, expensive, famous, or interesting, we have to add more, okay? Because the words here have more than one syllable. And when we are making the superlative form, we add most. So we have beautiful, more beautiful, most beautiful. We have colorful, more colorful, most colorful. Difficult, more difficult, most difficult. Expensive, more expensive, most expensive. We have famous, more famous, most famous. We have interesting, more interesting, and most interesting. Remember that when we have a word that has more than one syllable, we usually add more for the comparative form and most for the superlative. Some adjectives change their forms altogether. Okay, some adjectives change their form when they are moving up degrees of comparison. When they are going to the comparative and the superlative forms, they change their form. Examples are bad, late, good, little, much. So let's look at them. You have bad for the positive, and the comparative becomes worse, and the superlative becomes worst. For late, we have late, later, latest. We have good, better, best. We have little, less, least. We have much, more, and most. Now, can you try this? Complete the following table. You have the positive for good. Provide the comparative and the superlative degrees. You have the comparative for more popular. Provide the positive and the superlative forms of this adjective. We have heavy. Positive has been provided. Provide the comparative and the superlative. We have colorful. So provide the comparative and superlative for this adjective. I'd like you to pause the video and copy this out into your notebook. So make sure that this video is paused. Finish writing the task in your notebook. And when you are done writing and completing the table, then continue. You could scroll back to look at it if you haven't completed it. Now let's check our answers. You are told to complete the following table with the positive, comparative, and superlative forms of these adjectives. You were given good, so your comparative is better and superlative should be best. You were given more popular. The positive for it is popular and the superlative is most popular. You were given heavy, and the comparative for heavy is heavier and the superlative is heaviest. You were given colorful. The comparative for colorful is more colorful and the superlative is most colorful. Remember that when you have an adjective that has more than one syllable, you either add more for the comparative or you add most for the superlative. Good job, everyone. Now let's go on Edmodo, discuss what we've just heard, and then take our quiz.